Oga, good morning, sir. Oh, my powerful CEO, Jejelaye Nigeria Limited. No, sir, I couldn't come to the office today, sir. Eh? My document. Which one, sir? The one I submitted? Yes, the one I submitted for my office, for my employment. Oga, it's not for Joe. I didn't forge it, oh. No, sir. No, you have gone to my school? Oga, I'm a director in this company now, and you know I've been working, Oga, I've been working with you for so long. I'm a director now. What? How can I? The truth has come out. Oga, you cannot sack me. Oh, you cannot sack me. Even our guy in our country now, or guy in our country that even forged his own too. They didn't. Oga, they didn't sack him now. They didn't sack him, but you cannot sack me. Oh. They didn't sack our leader in our country now. That forged his own. Oga, you cannot sack me. Oh. You cannot sack me. Oga, you cannot sack me. They didn't sack our own leader in our country, like Nigeria now. They didn't sack him now. He forged his own too now. I'm not the only one. No. You cannot sack me. Please. You have to forgive me. Maybe it's an error. Please. You cannot. I'm fired. Oga, only fire me, sir. You cannot fire me. You cannot fire me. Just to learn about our guy here. They didn't sack him. You cannot sack me. Please. I'm coming to the office. Please.
So I'm really very excited that you did join us in this conversation, especially because I'd like you to, give us a bit of insight on how things happen in your alma mater. Right. So let's first of all let you give us a background of what your school, the overall administration of Chicago State University is like.
So just to, give your listeners a background about me, I attended Chicago State University in the late 90s. I worked as the editor of the school newspaper for 3 years.
Oh, yeah. And that's the Tempo, right?
Yes, that is Tempo, the university newspaper, which the university shut down a few years ago. So one thing that your viewers and listeners all need to understand is that the university itself does not have a student newspaper. And that is one of the biggest problems right there, that there is nobody to hold that administration accountable.
But Tempo was a university-based newspaper at the time you were there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We had a newspaper. The newspaper was around for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
And then the university shut it down in recent years. And there's been so much that's gone on in Chicago State in the last 10 to 15 years. So it actually does not surprise me that they are in the middle of this international incident because of the dysfunction that happens at that university. And it starts at the highest level, being the office of the president of the university, down to the members of the board of trustees who are appointed by the governor of Illinois. So that this situation, this sad situation that we're currently talking about is occurring is not a shock to me at all.
Are you subtly accusing the management of the university of some complexity in one way or the other? It sounded somehow like that. Is that what you're saying? That they cannot be totally exonerated from the things that happen in the school. Is that what you're saying?
I am absolutely saying that.
Oh, wow.
I would not be surprised if, as we keep learning more information about this, that there are people inside that university that were conspirators in this whole thing. That would not shock me at all. We cannot prove that yet, but that would not surprise me. And I say that because you have to understand the history of Chicago State. You have to realize that Chicago State has had a former president that was federally convicted of crimes. They had a financial aid director that was federally convicted of crimes, and these people went to prison. This is not a surprise to me that they're in the middle of this mess. Not at all, Precious.
Oh, wow. All right. Interesting. So, when it comes to the administration of the school proper, how what kind of due diligence would you say the school actually does, in background checks of the academic records that are submitted by students prior to admission into the school or for admission into the school?
So I would say that in terms of what we're talking about in terms of with the Nigerian president, we also have to put it in the context of that this happened back in the 1970s.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So absolutely, now today the technology has definitely changed.
Yes.
Back in the 70s, there's no telling what they were doing. I doubt they verified probably anything back in the 70s. So that is why I'm saying I could definitely understand how this situation got to where it is today, because we're talking about an institution back in the 70s that was doing things that were probably crazy back then. It's just the fact that the things that came out in the deposition and just some of the contradictory statements that we heard from the deposition, that's par for the course at Chicago State. I've covered this university for over 20 years, and they talk out of both sides of their mouth all the time. It is very difficult to get information out of this university.
Oh, wow. So you're saying that university management hasn't been quite honest with students and straightforward in the dealings? Is that what you're saying?
Never have been. Never have been.
Oh, wow.
No. And I'm not just saying that. You can ask any Chicago State alum, and they'll tell you the exact same thing. So, one of the things I find is funny, Precious, is that people in Nigeria have been asking me, well, how do you feel about all this bad press that's now coming down on the university you attended? And I was like, I'm absolutely happy. Because it's now shining a spotlight on Chicago State on an international level, which means now they got to get their acts together or they're going to be heads rolling. And I would not be surprised if the governor of Illinois, as this thing keeps going on, the governor, J.B. Pritzker, if he absolutely steps in and we start seeing board of trustee members resigning or being removed, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the president eventually taking the downfall for this. There's a lot more to this story. And what I'll say is that it's because of the culture of Chicago State and the culture of dysfunction and the history of corruption that they've had within their administration. None of this is shocking to me. It's shocking to you. It's shocking to people in Nigeria. This is not shocking to journalists in the city of Chicago, because we have covered this university for decades. So none of this surprises me.
Oh, my goodness. All right. So you've said quite a lot, and I'm trying to take most of the things that you've said in. So that it's interesting to know that, there's been that suspicion about the school and, some sort of dealings that aren't straightforward. But what have, our students been doing in trying to hold the university responsible to uphold at least truth?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that. Thank you for asking that, Precious.
Thank you.
Chicago State University, when I was a student there in the late 90s, we had a student population, I'd say probably 8,000 students. The current student population at Chicago State is maybe 1,000, maybe. And this is because of what has been happening over all these years. Their enrollment has just plummeted. It's gotten to the point where a few years ago, they were actually considering closing the university. The university is also financially strapped. And so when you have an institution like that is financially strapped because it's being underfunded by the government, being underfunded by the state of Illinois, it makes them susceptible to many of the things that have been happening in the last few years. And so I'll just tell you as of recently, 3 weeks ago, Precious, before this whole thing with the Nigerian president started hitting the news, there was a story run in the Chicago Sun-Times, which is a major newspaper here in Chicago, and it questioned why the president of this university, President Scott, received a $50,000 bonus that was given to her by the board of trustees when the enrollment numbers are dropping, the test scores are dropping, the graduation rates are dropping, and she's been getting a bonus every year since she's been there. She's been there at least 6 or 7 years. So again, there is so much about this. The professors at Chicago State University were on strike like 6 months ago. Back in the spring, they were on strike. Literally walked out. They were out on strike for a week, asking for better pay, asking for better benefits. And all this is going on as the student population is dropping. And this board of trustees thought it was a good idea to give the president of this university a bonus. And the news media in Chicago reported it. So I'm telling you all this stuff, and this is why I really want to come on your show, Precious. And I've got a lot of inquiries for me to come on shows in Nigeria, but I took my time. I really liked what you talked about on your YouTube channel, on your platform, and I said, no, I want to talk to her first because she's going to get an understanding of where I'm coming from with this. And the really sad part about this is that the education you get at Chicago State University, I'd put it up against anybody. My professors were top notch. However, the administration is trash. They are complete trash. They always have been. And this is not a surprise that we find ourselves here on October the 6th, 2023, talking about this and asking questions about was Chicago State complicit in what has happened. It is an investigation that is going to be ongoing. I am happy that this is an international story. I'm hoping that even more journalists start digging into this because we're going to find out a whole lot about this university and how this whole thing went down. None of this is a surprise to me.
Whoa, interesting. All right, so back here in Nigeria, you cannot actually graduate from a Nigerian university, at least at recent time, without at least, I think within your third or final year, without the school doing a background check of your required documents. So they get to check through your basic required documents. For instance, what we call they get to verify your WAEC, they get to, make other verifications. If your WAEC is not verifiable, they will deny you graduation. So do you think Chicago State University, applies such due diligence in their issuance of certification?
I would say that the university probably does. I would say that the university definitely does. I mean, they definitely put me through a bunch of stuff when I was trying to graduate. You still need this class. So I think they do their due diligence, but I think it's like anything else. All you need is one person on the inside who's real willing to grease the wheels for somebody. So, that could be definitely a possibility of what we're talking about here. It only takes one person who, decides, I'm going to take care of this person for this to happen. What I will say is that there are structures in place in Chicago State. There are protocols in place in Chicago State. The problem is, were those protocols followed? And that is where this story is really going. Did people follow the proper protocols? Is everything on the up and up? And I think you have a lot of officials who are very nervous right now. So I want to say this to you, Precious. Think about it for a second. If you're a university, it doesn't matter if you're an American university or any university, but if you're a university and one of your graduates goes on to become the president of a nation that has over 200 million people, don't you think you would be promoting that as your university?
Absolutely. His pictures will be everywhere for promotionals for the university. To pride on it that, our ex-students is XYZ, and that's a big deal.
And Chicago State hasn't done that. So
why do you think they haven't done?
I don't know. Why do you think they haven't done it?
I don't know. You're there, so you can tell better. So I don't know.
It's a good question. It's a question that everyone needs to be asking. Why did this university not promote the fact that one of their alums just became the president of one of the largest countries on the continent of Africa with 200 million people? I would be promoting that like crazy.
The largest, the biggest African country. That's it.
Yeah. And you have
a country with the biggest black population, by the way. So we can go on and on. So
And let's be honest, the Nigerian American population is arguably the best educated population in the United States. People from Nigeria who've come over here to immigrate, come over here, they go to fine institutions.
Absolutely.
Those who stay here, they get great jobs. I would be promoting that like crazy if I'm Chicago State, but they didn't do it. So what is that? What is that telling you? What type of questions does that mean that you should have for the university? I think everyone here kind of understands what possibly happened. We just can't prove it yet. And when we can prove it, this is going to be one of the biggest stories in a very long time. And again, I'm very happy that it's starting to get the international attention that it deserves. Because I know over in Nigeria, you all want to know who you have as a president. There are questions about his identity. There are questions about how he has done some of the things he did. And I'm telling you, here in Chicago, we have questions on what Chicago State University has done. And we've had these questions for a number of years. And this particular time, they may have gotten themselves in a situation that they're not going to be able to get out of unscathed. So I'm going to stay on this story. There are a lot of journalists who are now also looking into this, and there's so many different facets to look into this, and the news is starting to come out little by little. But this is a huge story, and I just came on your show because I want people in Nigeria to understand, if they've never been to the United States or they're not familiar with the United States, just some of the differences we have with our universities. I know there's questions about why his middle initial was not used. Here in American universities, they identify you by your social security number.
Oh, so your name doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. They really identifying you by the number. For example, when I was a student at Chicago State, when the professors would take attendance to see who was there that day, they do it back then by your social security number. Now, because we're in 2023 and identity theft is such a big thing, they've now adjusted that. So they give students an identification number for the school, and they use that number. But back in the day, it was done by your social security number. And I was there in the 90s. So I'm pretty sure back in the 70s, when President Bola was there, they were definitely using social security numbers. And that is why this whole thing of the social security number
belonging to someone else,
that we know belonged to a female. That is why that is such a big thing here. It's not by the names here. It's by the social security number. And that's what I...
So in your opinion, what do you think would have played out if the school had accepted? Now, during the deposition, after the deposition, the registrar had mentioned that, that they are setting in some way that, the president of Nigeria is the person whom they can testify that, went to their school, even though they haven't met him before, right? But how were they able to tell that the same person is the person who shares that same social security number? And in what ways do you think, or what's the reason why they probably didn't do the due diligence to see the discrepancies? Or is it just a pure negligence, or perhaps, it just skipped their mind?
So I'm going to say again, it could be all of the above that you just said. But I also think we also have to understand he was there in the late 1970s.
Yes. And
they did things so differently back then that, we have to keep that part of the context as we look at this. I think the answer is they may not be able to tell you how they can verify it because it was back in 1977. The people who were there at the time are no longer there. Those professors weren't there. Those administrators aren't there. I don't think they know what procedures they were actually following or not following. So, I just think a lot of this is, unfortunately, time is going to hurt a lot of it. But there are still a lot of things that we should be questioning Chicago State about. I have a story that I will be running within the next 24 hours that talks about the university archives. And the university archives, I will give you a preview and just tell you the basis of my story.
All right.
The archives are in complete shambles.
Oh, wow.
And when I say in complete shambles, I mean I was on the campus 2 days ago and looking for past tempo newspapers, the school newspapers, which tell the history of your school. And there were literally only 40 copies that I could find. And this newspaper has been around for 50 years. And when I asked the archivist, where are the rest of them, he didn't know because he'd just been hired 2 months ago. Chicago State University went 2 years of not having a university archivist. The archives were closed. Now, part of that was due to COVID, but also because the university is so underfunded and understaffed, they don't have people. So what I'm telling you is that for the last 2 years, no one could get into the university archives. So I don't know what happened to newspapers. The yearbook in which President Bola graduated in 1979.
Absolutely, that disappeared, by the way.
It is missing from the archives. I can physically confirm that because I was there.
Oh, wow.
It's not there.
You tried to source it, but you couldn't get through.
Couldn't get there. It wasn't there. Years up to that period were there. Years after that were there. The year everyone is looking for wasn't
not there.
So, what is that a coincidence?
So let me break this. Let me break this down for my Nigerian people. So you're saying that the graduation documents for graduation students of 1979 is mysteriously disappeared from the archive of the Chicago State University, but the ones for preceding years and years after it and all that are still there.
So what I'm saying is the yearbook. The yearbook.
That's what I'm saying. That's the yearbook is like the graduation book for that year. Basically, that's what we know it as. So I just needed to break it down for my people to understand.
Sure.
So that yearbook is missing, but the years that followed and the ones before it are still there. That particular year disappeared.
That year's gone. I actually have a photo of it. I have a photo of it. Literally, you see 1976, 1977. Whoops, there's a gap. 1980, 1981.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And it hasn't been checked out because the archives have been closed. So,
all right. So I'd like you to help us clarify the issue of third vendors issuing certificates and all that. But before we get to that clarification, back here in Nigeria, for instance, if the results that you submitted to the school to gain entrance to the school is questionable, even years after admission or even years after graduation, your graduation and your papers can be denied and can be retracted.
Yeah.
Is that a thing in Chicago State University?
I cannot speak 100% to that. I would think that they could revoke your degree. Because
those were basic requirements that you failed to meet.
Correct. So those are basic things that you basically entered the university on false pretenses. So you would think the university could have the power to revoke your degree, your academic records. I cannot speak for it 100% sure, but more than likely they do have that protocol in place. That is something I would have to get clarification on from the university spokesperson, but trying to reach a university spokesperson at Chicago State University is not easy.
Oh, wow, really? Why so?
No. It's just, again, Precious, you have to understand this is how this university works. For example, I can give you the number right now to call the main switchboard at that university. I did it the other day. Their operating hours are from like 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I called at 2 o'clock afternoon. It called me. I called it. It sent me to a voicemail and then told me the voicemail box was full and hung up on me.
Oh, wow.
And that's calling the main switchboard of the university. So, trying to reach a particular person can be even more daunting. And, this university has been, the Illinois Attorney General has looked into this university for violating the FOIA Act. And I can explain what that is for you. So here in the United States, we have a law called the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes.
Okay. So that means any citizen, journalist, whoever they wants to be, they can request certain documents from our public institutions.
Yes,
Chicago State University is a public institution. So you can put in a request and say, hey, I'd like to know how much money the president makes and how much the basketball coach makes. And they are required by law to acknowledge your application within 5 days and then get back to you within another 5 days. Well, Chicago State has routinely violated this law and just will not respond to requests, or if they do, they do it 2 months later, to the point where the Illinois Attorney General's office has on numerous occasions had to reach out to the university and say, hey, you need to supply these documents when people request them, and you need to do them in an expedited manner. This is just...
And there is no penalty.